Out here, we feel things. The sore calves that lead to epic views, the cool waterfall mist during a hot hike, and the breeze that hits just right at the summit. But hey, don't just listen to us. Experience it for yourself. All Trails makes it easy to discover the best of the outdoors, with more than 450,000 trails around the world, points of interest along the trail, and offline maps for always-on navigation. Download the free app today and find your next outdoor adventure.
Hello and welcome to Just Films and That, with me, Josh Hallam.
And me, Alice Oliver. This is the podcast where we talk about films that we think are underrated, underappreciated, or we just wanted to talk about them.
We're also going to get stuck into some classic films that one of us maybe hasn't seen, and maybe throw in some great guests along the way. So, we'll start, as we do every week, with a random question. Alice, is there a band or artist who are sort of wildly successful, but you don't like for whatever reason?
So there is one that comes to mind. And I'm going to preface this with saying that I totally can see that it's a band. I can totally see that this band works incredibly hard and is incredibly engaging with their fans and are really electric on stage. And I can totally see that and appreciate that. But I think the Foo Fighters are really overrated. I feel like every time a new Foo Fighters song comes out, people go absolutely berserk for it. And I'm like, it just feels pretty basic to me. And now I think Dave Grohl is fantastic and he has worked so hard over the years, and obviously coming from the trauma that was Nirvana and what happened to Kurt Cobain to then create something that is like so monumental of modern rock. I totally appreciate that. And I have so much respect for him. And every time I hear him in an interview, I think, oh, what a dude. Like he's just everyone's like favorite American uncle sort of thing. But I just feel like the songs, they're just a bit basic for me. And I would never choose to listen to them. Like whenever I listen to Radio X a lot, which for people who don't live in the UK is like our alternative rock radio station. And I listen to that all the time and they play loads of Foo Fighters. And I'm like, to me, there's just better bands out there with similar sounds, but are like doing better things. So yeah, that's going to get me in a lot of trouble because I know a lot of people love the Foo Fighters. But yeah, they were the first ones that came to mind. What about you? Who's yours?
We here at Just Films and Like would like to distance ourselves from the comments made by Alice on our most recent episode.
Totally. Fair enough. I totally understand.
Mine's probably even more controversial.
Oh,
it's a bit different because I don't completely dislike them, but I don't like quite a lot of songs by Queen.
Okay.
I don't know what it is because I love some songs, but I don't know if it's because some of them are overplayed. I don't know if some of them are just not my taste. There's a couple of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of examples. Like, there's just like Don't Stop Me Now, I think is a good one because that was overplayed so much like 10 years ago. And I've never been able to get over that. So like when that comes on, if you're ever at a function, party, wedding, whatever, I don't know, it's a bit like when Don't Stop Believing came out. It just makes me go, oh, I've heard this so many times. Like I can't bother with it.
Yeah, it's too much, isn't it? It is just too much of a good thing. Like, if you'd have heard that sort of when Queen were in their heyday, and imagine hearing that for the first time, you'd have been like, oh my God, like the energy in it, like it's so vibrant. It's such a great tune. But it's been so popular for so long that it comes on again and it's just like, oh, like, it loses the magic, I think. So we'll move on to this week's film, which is Vertigo from 1958 by Alfred Hitchcock and starring Jimmy Stewart. Now, this was Josh's pick. So, Josh, tell us, what is it about and why did you pick it?
Vertigo is about, as you say, Jimmy Stewart plays a detective named Scotty who's recently retired from the San Francisco police due to a sort of crippling fear of heights, which is then bringing on vertigo, hence the title. He's hired by an old college friend to follow his friend's wife, who is acting strangely. And then as the case sort of starts to unravel, Scotty finds himself becoming more and more obsessed with his target and the circumstances in which he finds himself. So that's what it's about. Now, I picked it because it's a classic film. And I wanted to do another classic film because obviously we brought them in and stuff. And I know that this is always up there with best film of all time. I think it was a few years ago. I think it toppled Citizen Kane for best film of all time in possibly, I think it was Sight and Sound magazine. I knew about the plot, but I'd never actually seen it before. I always get it mixed up with Rear Window, which is another Hitchcock film. And we also hadn't done a Hitchcock film yet. So I thought, why not? He's one of the greats. So as we're doing these classic films, let's tackle a Hitchcock film. I should say before we start, by the way, I do have a cold. So if I sound like absolute boiled shit, it's because
he doesn't. That's just his normal voice.
Yeah, it's
Don't
just
let
what I
him
sound
trick you.
Yeah, it's just what I sound like. But I'll try and keep the sniffling to a minimum. But yeah, Alice, had you seen this one before?
So I had seen it. I had seen it either at university or at college. I can't remember where, but I studied film at both. And this was one that we did for one of our modules. Unfortunately, I can't remember what module it was for. And I remember it being, I thought it was like 3 hours long. I remembered it being so long, which then made me think, oh, maybe I didn't enjoy it. And then that's why it felt so long. I sort of vaguely remembered the premise, but couldn't remember sort of tons and tons of detail about it. So I was excited to watch it again because, like you say, it is one that always pops up. I feel like the sort of the DVD cover or like the poster of it, of that sort of silhouetted figure falling down the sort of shaft, I suppose it is, isn't it? That's in the church. That's quite iconic. And that sort of pops up in places in sort of pop culture references. I mean, I'm sure I've seen it where I get most of my pop culture references, The Simpsons or Family Guy or Futurama, one of those. So yeah, I was excited to watch this one again. So you said you hadn't seen it. So how did you feel coming away from it? Did it meet your expectations of what it could be?
So I was a little disappointed.
Oh.
I was a little disappointed. Look, I'll preface this by saying, as we've said many a time, it is clearly a classic for a reason. I could see the reasons why it was a classic, and its influence and its legacy is there for everyone to see. But in terms of when we watch other classic films, for example, The Great Dictator, that had something for me. That had some magic. Whereas there were some elements of this where, I don't know, I was a little bored in places, or it just didn't quite grab me as much as I wanted it to. There was plenty to enjoy. But overall, I was slightly disappointed, slightly bored, and there was and it wasn't as gripping as I thought it would be. That being said, there was loads that I did like. What about you?
So I suppose kind of similar to what you're saying. I'm not sure if bored was maybe the right word, but it certainly lacked the same kind of pace, and I would definitely say lacked the magic, like you say, thinking about something like The Great Dictator, that just felt like felt like monumental. I know it sounds like so weird and dramatic, but there was something about it. And even similar with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, I was so engaged with those films. And with this, I think maybe I wasn't as engaged, but like you said, there was plenty about it to enjoy. I thought it was quite experimental in places. It felt that way. It sort of opens and you get these almost like animated scenes of like these spirals and almost like trying to articulate how it feels to be going mad. Obviously, the film deals massively with mental illness and your sort of mental deterioration in terms of Vertigo, but also with Madeline's character, who her husband believes she is channeling her great grandmother or something, is trying to convince her to kill herself and all this. And it raises a lot of questions. It's like, oh, is this kind of like generational trauma that's being passed down to her? Or is she sort of going mad and having these blackout moments where she doesn't really remember what's happening? So I enjoyed that it did deal with mental health. And I don't think I was expecting that from a film so old. It's like you hear all the time now that we're only just coming to grips with mental health and just sort of appreciating and understanding how diverse and complex it can be. So it was just interesting to see that in something that is regarded one of these like classic, greatest of all time sort of films. Did you expect it to sort of delve into those topics as much as it did? Obviously, with the name Vertigo, we knew it was to do with that phobia specifically, but it really kind of went a bit further than that, I thought.
No, I didn't. I expected it to be a sort of thriller. I expected it to probably be and set the template for a sort of modern day thriller, which it did in many ways. And when I say I was bored and disappointed, I think I probably went in with sky high expectations, which is the downside of dealing with these classic films. Is sometimes they just can't live up to the expectation they expect, because you perhaps expect them to be these life-firming experiences, which they're not. There's, a lot of them are designed to entertain and to make money. So, but back to your point about mental health, no, I didn't expect that. I expected a lot of stuff dealing with, actual vertigo, which I knew would be in the film, from the fact that, like I say, its legacy is clear from the fact that it's over 60 years old. I thought it was interesting, like you said, that it dealt with mental health from different perspectives. So you've got Scotty, he's dealing with his vertigo. He's dealing with almost like a PTSD type thing because he loses a colleague at the start of the film, which is what leads him to retire. And then he has this dark journey into obsession. And then you also have Madeline's character, like you say, who deals with not quite clear what it is, because obviously because of what happens at the end, because of the twist, it's not actually clear what that character, who she was supposed to be, was dealing with, but it certainly deals with elements of sort of, I guess, depression or being sort of maybe BPD, that sort of thing. But I thought that was really interesting. Like you say, you don't associate films that are this old with dealing with that sort of thing, but it very much does, and it doesn't shy away from it. So I thought that was interesting. I thought the performances of the two leads was really good. I thought Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak were really good. I'd not seen Jimmy Stewart in much before, other than, I think, probably It's a Wonderful Life is the only other thing I've really seen him in. And I hadn't seen Kim Novak in anything. And I thought both of them did a really great job, as well as the supporting cast as well. But I thought they were both really great. Jimmy Stewart's he's a great everyman, isn't he? He's like he's like his day's Tom Hanks or whatever.
Oh yeah. That's a great way to describe him. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I thought Kim Novak was, she's this sort of stunningly, like, beautifully mercurial, mysterious woman who has a lot to do with not that much dialogue. She doesn't speak for a lot of I think it's the first third or first half of the film. She just does a lot of the camera just following around, and that's no easy feat, to do a lot of acting with your eyes and a lot of acting with your face. I mean, what do you think of the performances?
Yeah, really good. And like you said, there were quite a few sequences where there was no dialogue whatsoever, and a really long one towards the beginning. So where Scotty is first hired by, I want to say, Elster, who hires him, like his old friend or something, hires him to tail his wife Madeline, or the woman who is pretending to be his wife, as we find out later, and it's just him following her all the time, like through these different locations. So, I mean, a brilliant way to see kind of San Francisco. So obviously it's set in San Francisco, which, if a Hollywood film isn't set in New York, it's set in San Francisco. And visually that's really pleasant. Like, I love looking at the streets and the buildings and the bridge and the coast. It all looks wonderful. So you get these really long sequences where he's following her around, and he's driving in his car following her, and then he's like creeping around corners following her. They go into the gallery, they go into a cemetery, like loads of different locations that we get to really try and build an idea of her and try and understand what her problem is, what is she thinking, what's going through her mind. And he sort of pieces it together as the audience does. Like, he sees her sitting in the gallery looking at the portrait of Carlotta, who's her great-great-grandmother, and he notices that her hair is done in the same way, and that she goes and buys flowers that she's holding in the portrait. And so you're kind of getting these ideas of, oh, okay, so maybe she thinks she is Carlotta, maybe she's possessed by Carlotta, or maybe there's this kind of generational trauma thing that is like passed down to her that she's now sort of reliving in her own mind. And I thought all of that was really interesting. And you get quite a nice character development between the two of them. There's a nice moment where, so Madeline has thrown herself into the sea, into the bay, just near the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge. And Scotty jumps in to save her, and he takes her back to his house. And they have kind of this relationship building moment where he's asking her loads of questions and sort of says things like, oh, I've been to this gallery and I've been here. And she's like, oh yeah, I've never been, I've only driven past. And we know that that's not true because we've seen her in these locations or we've seen her doing these things already in the film. So then you think, oh, wow. So has she forgotten or is she lying? And it just conjures up so many questions about her character. And you can really see, I think Jimmy Stewart is really kind of emotive in these instances where you can see like that he doesn't quite believe what she's saying. And it's like, he almost thinks, is she lying? Is she just gone mad? Like he can't differentiate between the two. And then obviously he ends up falling obsessively in love with her incredibly quickly. Naughty.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, which I do want to come back to. But I completely agree with you about the point about San Francisco, because it's a really interesting choice. Because I was reading around the film that it's based on a book which I think is set in Paris. It's certainly set in France, but they moved it to San Francisco, obviously because it's an American film, but also because San Francisco is really hilly. And obviously Vertigo is a whole thing about heights. So that's quite an interesting stylistic choice. But you are right, you do get these... You get some really interesting direction in terms of the way the scenes are framed. And there's a lot of scenes. There's a lot of quite long scenes with lots of dialogue. Like there's a big scene at the beginning between Scotty and Midge, his sort of... I think she's like his ex-girlfriend, but now friend.
Yeah, ex-fiance.
Yeah, but
they
they're
were
now
engaged, weren't they?
Just sort of friends, I think they're meant to be, aren't they? And there's big, long scenes of sort of dialogue with all the exposition at the beginning. And then there's long periods, like you say, of him just following Madeline around San Francisco with lots of different shots of skyscrapers or long country roads or the mission that they go to, which is out on the outskirts of San Francisco. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think I agree as well. It really captures obsession quite well in that there are lots of scenes where things happen, and because it's directed and written in such a way that you view everything through Scotty's eyes. That a lot of that is down to the script. A lot of that is that to James Stewart's really brilliant performance, because a lot of, like I say, a lot of lingering shots just on his face reacting to stuff that you can't see, and then it shows at you. So there's things like him following her in a car, or there's a bit where he seems to tail her to a hotel, which she then seems to go into and be there, but then not there, and those things are never, almost never actually clarified. So on purpose, so that you are discovering you only know what Scotty knows, which I think is really interesting. So it does capture that obsession by framing it in such a way. And there's a lot of really great tension building in the script as well. And I think really great use of music as well. Like it's got some Hitchcock films use music like no one else to an impact for me. You know, if you think of Psycho or this or The Birds or other Hitchcock films, the music is so unsettling, or whatever they want the music to do, it does. There's a lot of scenes in this where if the score isn't so good, it's nowhere near as unsettling, but it really is quite impactful, the music, I'd say. What would you say?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it brings the scene together and the emotions in the scene together so brilliantly. I think I've mentioned before that it gets a bit annoying. Like, there are films that I've watched where there's music all the time and it's a bit irritating because it's really kind of indicating to the audience, you're meant to feel sad now, you're meant to feel happy now, you're meant to feel scared now, or whatever. But when Hitchcock does it, and especially in Vertigo, it works to enhance it. It never becomes boring, it never becomes overdone, and it never gets annoying. It just always really works. And you try and imagine some of those scenes without the score, and you just think it wouldn't have the same feeling. And because some things happen that do feel a bit creepy, like you just said, when she goes to that kind of hotel or where she's renting a room, and then Scotty follows her in. And he says to the woman at the desk, like, oh, where's the woman in room? I can't remember the exact number, but it's like room like 237. And it's like, oh, she hasn't been here today. And he's like, what? Like, I just saw her go up the stairs. And then the music really adds to the feeling of like, did we just see that? Like, have we just seen a ghost? Have we imagined it? Is she in cahoots with this woman at the front desk to say, if anyone calls for me, don't you dare say that I'm here or whatever. And the music just does this all the way through. And it just fits so well, and it's put together so well in a way that it just enhances what's going on screen without either overshadowing it or just making it too obvious and just kind of a bit annoying.
No, I agree, I completely agree, and I love with the music as well. Like you say, I love the opening titles and the sequence where it's got the sort of animations and the, like you say, it's like the scene where he's supposed to be, I guess, going mad in a sort of almost Shakespearean sense, isn't it? That you see all these images, and I really enjoyed that with the music. It's quite the opening titles are quite discombobulating. You know, it's quite strange to see something from so long ago that has such an impact on you watching it now. I think it definitely sets a template for what other films have tried to achieve and got nowhere near. And like you say, a lot of that is down to the attention to detail, the music, the script, the tension building, the framing of the shots. I did think
framing,
it was really interesting.
Yeah, the framing as well. That was one of the things I put down. It just, every shot just felt really intentional. And you got some really like beautiful painted backdrops, I guess they are. So a lot of the times the characters would be stood near a window. So we've got the scenes that, you know, towards the beginning, we're in Midge's, it's either her flat or like her studio or something, but there's a window like looking out over San Francisco and the blinds are open and you've got this great, what I assume is a painting of what the landscape would look like to kind of act as your view outside the window. And this happens over and over again. Pretty much any time a character is near a window, the blinds are open and you can see and you're given this brilliant visual of what's outside. And I just thought they didn't have to do that. Like, especially in the scenes that are happening at night. So when Scotty takes Madeline back to his house after she jumped in the bay, that's at nighttime. And you've got this great external sort of scenery. Are they paintings? Do you think they're paintings? I mean, they look like paintings to me.
So I believe that the shot you're referring to with the background of San Francisco is not painted. I believe it's so I believe that's a real place because I think you can go there.
Oh wow!
But I think a lot of them will be painted.
Yeah.
Or in whatever the technique was back then, I'm not entirely sure. But
yeah, some kind of green screen.
Yeah, but that just goes to show, whether it's green screen, projection, paintings, whether it's real, I'm not too sure. But the fact of the matter is some of them are real and some of them are painted, or some of them are fabricated, and you can't tell the difference between the two, from what I could tell.
Yeah, and they didn't have to do that. Like, you could close the blinds, you could close the curtains, and we'd be none the wiser. But the fact that they went into the effort to doing that, I just really appreciated that. Another thing I really liked was how Scotty was just so iconically a PI, like with the hat, with the suit, with the way he spoke, almost with the way he moved even. It was all just so like straight out of a textbook, like this is what you want your detective guy to look like. I really like that. The other thing that I did really like as well is that it doesn't finish on a happy ending. It's pretty damn bleak. And you're also still left with a few questions at the end. But obviously, so they drive to the church where he believes. So towards the end, we discover. So Madeline, they believe, has died, or Scotty believes that Madeline has died by throwing herself off the roof of a church. And he meets this new woman. It's called Judy, right? She then becomes that character. So he meets a woman called Judy who looks exactly like her, and he becomes obsessed with her. And then he discovers that actually that is Madeline and Judy, and they are one and the same, and they are the same person. And then he gets a bit angry about this. So he then drives Judy to the location where Madeline allegedly threw herself off the roof and committed suicide. And they get there, and he's able to kind of overcome his vertigo because of the kind of anger he feels, I guess. Gets to the top, and then Judy gets scared by a nun who's like in the dark and sort of comes out. And then she ends up throwing herself off the roof. So you've got this like weird, like almost double suicide thing that's happened. Obviously, Madeline hasn't actually killed herself, but we've got you kind of see that happening in the first instance, and you're led to believe that it's happened. And then Judy ends up doing it anyway. And it's just this really interesting sort of version of events repeating themselves. And that's interesting when you hark back to the whole Carlotta thing of like this generational trauma and kind of trauma just passing down and history sort of repeating itself. So it ends on a really bleak note. And I just kind of like that because it's so rare that films do that. Like, even in this day and age, I mean, obviously, if you go into more sort of art house and more left field cinema, I'm sure you will find much more bleak endings. But in terms of mainstream, and especially in terms of a film that is regarded as, like you said, one of the greatest of all time, it's bleak as hell. And I just kind of like that.
So it's interesting you say that, because my interpretation of the ending, which is an open interpretation, is that the nun comes up and startles Judy, and she falls, and it's sort of meant to have a quite tragic sense to it, because obviously she has been impersonating a woman who was thrown in inverted commas, thrown herself off a church tower, when in fact her husband has already killed her, thrown her body out the church tower, and Judy / Madeline is pretending to be her to give the illusion that she has done so. So she runs up the steps knowing Scotty can't follow her, and then to replace her, Gavin, who is the guy who hires Scotty, throws the body out the church. And I think it's meant to be quite tragic that she then falls out almost in the same way. That's my interpretation anyway.
No, maybe I'm inferring things, or maybe I just kind of missed a moment. But yeah, maybe she probably does fall, because I did think it was a bit odd that she would just jump. Like, that didn't quite make sense. But no, yeah, what you're saying makes much more sense.
But that's interesting, because it's a 60-odd-year-old film and we're still talking about the ending.
So we'll move on to talk about anything that we didn't like about the film. Josh, would you like to go first? Was there anything that really stood out to you that you just kind of thought, oh, would like to change that, or were less impressed with?
Yeah, so there was a few places where, for me, it was a little dull. There was a few shots and a few sequences that I thought were a bit longer than they needed to be. Like I said earlier, there was a lot of scenes of a lot of dialogue, and then a lot of scenes of not a lot of dialogue. And I don't know if this just says something about my attention span. I don't know if it's because, I'm not going to lie, I watched this yesterday when I had this cold. So that might have informed my opinion. I don't know, the fact that I was a bit knackered. But so there's some scenes where it was a little dull and a little boring, where I thought it could have done a little less lingering and a little more progression, a little bit more sort of action. Not action in a traditional action film sense, but, it could have moved it along a little bit more. I was a little unsure, and we've already alluded to this, so I'd be interested to get your take on it, just how quickly he became obsessed with Madeline, because I know that he's meant to be quite emotionally fragile and vulnerable because he's been through a lot, as is shown in the film, but he becomes very obsessed with this woman. And I know a lot of his behaviour is informed by mental health, but a lot of it is also still quite questionable. I don't know, what did you think about that?
Yeah, no, interesting. I did think that whilst watching it, but also keeping in mind that it is, like with these kind of animations that you see in it, it is all about this sort of spiral. And it is kind of like this spiral into madness. And you see him getting progressively more and more sort of erratic, and that as the film goes on, until the end, where he really sort of kicks off at Madeline / Judy. But yeah, so they do fall in love incredibly quickly. But I wonder if that's a lot to do with the mystery of her, isn't it? And also, she's quite vulnerable. But this kind of annoyed me a bit as well, is she is very vulnerable, and he sort of just puts it on her. And he kisses her very, very sort of quickly after they first meet. And that's his mate's wife. Like, I know it's not really, but as far as he's concerned, that is his mate's wife. So it's just a bit of like a dickhead move. But he is unstable, I would say. And obviously, we get this little bit of backstory that he and Midge were engaged once, and then she broke it off. So that's interesting, because it's like, well, why did she? Like, has he displayed this kind of behavior before? As he kind of had mental health problems that she couldn't deal with, as well as he had kind of obsessive behavior. So that's interesting as well. I feel like I didn't really get any proper closure on Midge's character.
No.
Like, what happened to her? What was her end?
And
like,
she's so likable.
Where did she end up?
Yeah, she's so likable.
She's great, isn't
and she
she?
cares so much for her friend, who is a bit, I don't know. It doesn't seem like he's been a great friend to her, but she seems like she's been a great friend to him. Like you say, his behaviour is just a lot of it is clearly meant to be informed by his mental health. But then he also acts incredibly controllingly, if that's a word. He's very controlling towards Madeline, or Judy, in fact. He makes Judy change her appearance to look like this woman who he loved, who died. And it only gets to a point where he realizes that they're the same person, where his behavior does worsen and he makes her go back to the church. But until that point, he didn't know they were the same person. So he is, as far as he can tell, acting in this completely controlling and manipulative way towards this woman who he's seeing because she looks like another woman who died, as far as he knows. So that was a little strange. It made him a little bit more unsympathetic, I guess. It made him a little bit harder to get, to like. But I also understand that it's meant to be capturing obsession. So I don't know if the point is necessarily that you're supposed to like him, but I did struggle a little bit, and I don't know if that is because it's indicative of the time or if I'm maybe looking at it with a more unkind 2021 eye where, things aren't the same as 1958 for many, many positive reasons, I guess. What do you think in terms of his behavior towards her?
Yeah, obsessive, controlling, and all those things, but does feel like it's all very much related to his mental health. And just thinking about, say, Norman Bates in Psycho, like Hitchcock doesn't really deal with heroes in the traditional sense, it seems. And your main character isn't necessarily the hero. Like, I don't think you should want to be like Scotty in Vertigo, and it could have gone that way. Like, it could have been the story of like this ex-police officer who was dealing with this, horrendous fear that he couldn't get over. And then you kind of go with him on his journey to getting over it. But the fact is, his only way of getting over it is whilst he's being really awful to Judy. But I don't think you're really meant to have sympathy with him. And I don't think Hitchcock intended for him to be that likable. So I think it's okay, if you know what I mean? Like, because he's not saying, this is how you should act, or it's like, oh, look, and now he's gotten away with it too. I mean, we don't know if he gets away with it because the end is so unclear, I suppose, like of what happens really afterwards. So it made him, you didn't really connect with him as much. And I wonder if that's another reason why maybe we didn't love it maybe as much as we could have done, like, because you do feel very connected to Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator, and you do feel very connected to Jane Russell and Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And it's just about whether the characters they need to have a likability factor, I think, for you to be rooting for them and you want to see what happens in their life. But with Scotty, you just don't really feel like that. And it also felt a bit weird that, so he's just discovered that the woman who he apparently loved more than anything else in the world isn't actually dead. And instead of taking the joy out of that, he goes down the absolute worst way. And he's like, how dare you manipulated me? Why this? Why that? And it's like, she didn't really do any of it on purpose. Like, she was hired by this guy to play a role. He probably paid her quite a decent wedge. Nice. Like, are you going to say no? A woman in 1958 to loads of cash? Maybe not, right? But then she does try and explain herself, and she says, like, oh no, I really loved you too. And they embark on a sort of relationship that they both kind of seem happy with. And then he just gets so angry at her. And I just feel like it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because she did deceive him, but then it's like he fell in love with her so quickly. It's like, is that real? Did you ever think that was real love? You can't fall in love properly with someone after a couple of days. Right? I mean, maybe you can. I can't, but...
So we'll move on to talking about the critical reception then. Now, I've picked this because it's a classic, so we know it's going to be up there. But let's see if we can decide if it's deserving of a classic status. I mean, we know it's a classic. How do you think it did? How do you think it does in terms of a rating on on an internet site that was created many, many years after it was released?
I reckon it did pretty well. I think there was a lot sort of technique-wise about it that was very interesting and that was maybe quite groundbreaking for the time. I'm not super familiar with 1950s cinema, so I'm not sure like what they were doing at that time. But a lot of it, if you put yourself in that kind of mindset, a lot of it did feel quite fresh. And I think visually it was very interesting, and the way it built the story and built the tension was quite good for the most part. I reckon it did quite well, and we know that people like go mad for Alfred Hitchcock, and we know people go mad for Jimmy Stewart. And given that, like thinking back to some of the other classics that literally were getting like 80%, 90%, up to 100, I reckon it did quite well. So I would go definitely well into the 80s, I reckon. Let's say an 86, IMDb wise.
you're not far wrong.
Oh, yeah.
IMDb, it gets 8.3 out of 10 at time of recording.
Oh, I was a bit generous. Oh.
And then on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience give it 93%.
Wow.
And the critics give it 94%.
Crikey.
I mean, that's got to be the most similar. That's got to be the most similar audience to critic score we've ever seen on Rotten Tomatoes.
I would say so, definitely. So the critics love these classic films, don't they?
Yeah.
They've been the biggest scorers of all.
And
of them,
that's
I
why
think.
they're classics. That's why we're doing them. So for me, so for you, is that deserving of its classic status? Is it deserving of those high scores?
I think in some regard it is deserving of its classic status for all the things that I just said about kind of the technique and it being a bit experimental. Some of the moments and some of the scenes were quite iconic, but something that I've found with the other classic films that we've done is so much more of them was kind of entrenched in our pop culture today, like whether it was certain quotes, certain lines, or like certain bits of music. Whereas this, I feel less so. So I wonder if it is deserving of its classic status, but maybe a bit less than the other films we've done, if you know what I mean.
No, I think that's a good point. I would say I pretty much agree with you. I think that I think it is deserving of its classic status. I think that its legacy in terms of the way it's influenced the way films are made now. Even right down to if you watch the opening chase sequence across the roof, it's really similar to the opening chase when they're chasing Trinity in The Matrix. There's lots of really similar shots of them jumping onto sort of skylights and stuff.
Point.
Yeah, so I think that sort of thing, or the way it builds tension, or the way it's got even right down to things like having quite the twist ending and that sort of thing. It's clear to see that it sets a lot of the benchmarks for how to make a modern day thriller. So I think its legacy is there for you to see, and I'm really glad I watched it. I am really glad I watched it. I didn't like it as much as I wanted to like it, but that is sort of my own takeaway from it. But I can see why it's deserving of its classic status. So for me, it is deserving of its classic status. I wish I'd enjoyed it more, but it's definitely deserving of its classic status.
Yep, agreed.
So there we go, another classic film in the bag. And whilst it may not have been as loved by us as some of the others, I think it's definitely safe to say we're both glad that we watched it. So Alice, it's your turn to pick next week. So what are we watching?
Oh, right. Hold on to your hats, Josh, okay?
Oh, God.
We're going to be watching Terminator Salvation.
Terminator Salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And we'll say no more.
We will say no more because I'm interested in that one. Well, there we go. So join us next week for Terminator Salvation. Do feel free to give it a watch in the meantime if you haven't already seen it. I believe it's the fourth one. Am I right, Alice?
It is, yes.
So, yeah, Terminator Salvation. In the meantime, if you could pop onto your Apple iTunes app and give us a 5-star rating or review, we'd really appreciate it. It helps other people notice us and they can hear our opinions on Vertigo, if that matters to anybody.
Oh, it does. I'm sure it does.
And in the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch, the email address is filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Just Films and That or Just Films and That Pod. And our website is www.justfilmsandthatpod.com. Alice, thank you for joining me as ever.
It's been a pleasure, Josh, and thank you.
See you next week for Terminator Salvation. Cheerio.
Bye.
Gene Smart has just returned to Broadway in the hit play, Call Me Izzy. And critics can't stop raving. The New York Times cheers. Gene Smart is an awe-inspiring triumph. Deadline calls it a tour de force performance and a remarkable new play. The audience is dazzled and completely in her hands, says The New Yorker. And the Washington Post adds, Gene Smart is transfixing. Call Me Izzy, the can't-miss Broadway event of the summer, through August 17th only.
For Mervis Diamond Importers, I'm Ronnie Mervis. Not far from the big mine in Kimberley, South Africa, where the first diamonds were found, lies a small dusty town on the isolated plains. In over 100 years, nothing much has ever happened there, except on Fridays. when the local diamond diggers hold their weekly rough diamond market. Once a week, the prospectors who still work the small independent claims gather to sell off the week's production. Buyers come from long distances because the quality of the stones is so exciting. The bidding for the rough diamonds is fierce. Buyers scream at each other in a frenzy to get the very best diamonds. My brother Kenny attends these sales. He makes sure that he's there early, and Mervis Diamonds gets some fantastic diamonds. Then we bring our diamonds directly to Washington. There are no middlemen. That's why Mervis Diamonds has unbeatable prices and a selection unmatched anywhere. Mervis Diamond Importers. Mervis means more diamonds, much better quality, and the most value. Financing is available. Go to mervisdiamond.com to learn more. For an appointment, call 1-800-HER-LOVE. Nobody pays retail anymore. Why should you?